Hi, welcome back. If you're just joining us, welcome to the Arnolt Center's annual symposium. We have our final speaker tonight, Paula Lavigne from ESPN. Paula was covering the Me Too movement before it was called that. She's sort of ahead of her time here. She's a champion of women in particular who have been abused in their sports or by athletes. She uncovered the Baylor football sex scandal and even wrote a book, which is available outside. Putting my plug for you there, Paula. And while others broke the Nassar gymnastics story, our friends at USA Today, or the Indianapolis Star, I'm sorry, Paula broke it wide open by pounding Michigan and Michigan state officials to release the documents and showing us just how widespread that scandal was. But I'm also a fan. You can read all about Paula's career in our booklet or online, but I want to just tell you, I'm also a fan of Paula because she gives so much to journalism. She's always at all of our investigative conferences, IRE. She's always a speaker in demand, and so we're really thrilled she could come to us today. She is from Nebraska, so don't hold it against her, you guys. But one of the reasons I love Paula is in her work is that, you know, she just has the right take on our business in journalism. Listen to this gem of a tweet she had from Paula on classified docs when that whole episode was exploding about Trump and Biden and Pence all having classified docs. This is what Paula said. If the same people who processed federal FOIA requests were in charge of classified documents, we wouldn't have this problem. They're masters of making sure information doesn't get out. And Paula has really been a champion of FOIA. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Paula Lavigne. And can I just say one other thing? So Paula's going to give her speech, is going to talk for several minutes, and then we're going to try this. We haven't succeeded in any class, in any session yet, but we're going to have some questions. Could you go to the mics? We have mics on both sides, so we're going to try this time and see if that works. Thanks, Paula.
Thank you for everyone who put this symposium together, and thank you for Kathleen for this surprising opportunity. I do appreciate the warm welcome because the last time I was here, I wasn't what you would really call welcomed. My colleague, Willie Weinbaum, and I were here doing a story about some IU athletes who had complained about their medical care. And Kevin Wilson and Indiana had already parted ways, but people were still pretty touchy about the whole thing. So we were at the university rowing dock. I don't even know if you guys know where that is, but it's a ways from here. And I'm trying to battle the wind and the noise and do this stand-up. And I'm thinking, okay, one of two things is going to happen. Some university PR person is going to come here and hassle me, or some dude on a jet ski is going to like blow by and douse me as I'm standing next to this lake. But fortunately, neither one of those things happened, but I was prepared because it would not be the first time I would have to stand up for myself in a situation like that. As Kathleen mentioned, I did go to the University of Nebraska. And what I'm going to tell you now may cause me to lose all credibility with you because you will think that I am a total fraud and that I am lying. But you can Google me and you can fact check me. Because there was a point in time when the Nebraska Cornhuskers were the best football team in the nation. I know it sounds like crazy talk today, and it's hard for me to remember, but it's true. When I was in college, Nebraska won not one, not two, but 3 national championships. And the coach at the time was a guy named Tom Osborne. And Tom Osborne, much like Bobby Knight here, Tom Osborne was God. The man could do no wrong. He was the state of Nebraska. He was the identity to everything. And at at the time, of course, this is September 1995. And as often happens with successful programs, some of TO's players got in trouble. There was a player who was currently charged with attempted murder that Tom Osborne allowed to practice with the team while this was happening. And the other was former NU running back Lawrence Phillips, who was being talked about as getting money from an agent. And that would actually end up being the least of Lawrence Phillips's problems. But I worked for the Daily Nebraskan at the time, which was a student newspaper. And the Daily Nebraskan did a couple editorial cartoons about these two football players and their various run-ins. And Tom Osborne did not like that. He didn't like it so much that he announced that the Daily Nebraskan reporters would be banned from covering Husker football practices. And again, being the top team in the nation, this was a big deal, right? Word gets out and the national media jump on the news of Tom Osborne's ban. ABC, ESPN, the New York Times, the LA Times, the Associated Press, the Chicago Tribune wrote this scathing editorial. This was a huge national story. And the Daily Nebraskan ran a story about the ban. And on that same day, my colleague at the time and classmate, Jeff Zeleny, sends me to cover the Huskers practice. I was not a sports reporter. He did not send any of the sports reporters. He looked at me. And Zeleny's version of the story is that he looked around the Daily Nebraskan newsroom and tried to pick out the one person who he thought was least likely to get kicked out of Memorial Stadium by Tom Osborne. And I'm sure that I was probably sitting in some corner of the room toiling away on some opus on student government when Zeleny caught my eye. I need to put this in a bit of context to where I was in my life at the time. I grew up a painfully shy kid. And by the time I got to high school, I had developed this sense of righteous indignation, but I did not know what to do with it. When I landed in a journalism class, I realized that this was my in, because reporting gave me cover. It gave me an excuse to approach people, to ask probing questions that I would be afraid to ask otherwise. But even in college, with this sort of newfound ability yet, what Zeleny was asking me to do that day in September '95 was exceptional. So I had never been, I'd been to Memorial Stadium, but I had never been to a Huskers practice. I literally did not know what door to go into. And so as I strode across campus with my little reporter's notebook in hand, I kept rehearsing in my head what I was going to say. And Memorial Stadium is this just massive, cavernous, like this shrine. And when it's empty, the glare from the concrete seats and everything just sort of makes it seem almost ethereal. And as I'm approaching this, I'm thinking, okay, I have no idea, like once I get in here, I have no idea how this is going to go down. I knew that there would be other reporters there, probably some TV cameras. I was so worried that I would do something embarrassing. But I found the right entrance to the stadium, and I walked through that door. As I made my way to the practice field and toward Tom Osborne, I was really sweating it, because I knew that whatever I did or said, that this was not just a Lincoln thing. This was now a national story. But as I got into position to ask my question, and I got over the fact that Tom Osborne is really, really tall and much taller than I thought he was, I started feeling really empowered, because I thought, you know, it's wrong of him to do this. Like, we have a right to be here. It's wrong of him to ban us from practice. And so, nervous as I am, as I'm getting ready to ask my question, I am pretty fired up. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but I know it was along the lines of, well, I'm here. I'm from the Daily Nebraskan. What are you going to do about it? I recall a bit of astonishment and resignation from Osborne. He's a rather mild-mannered man. And he responded by just trying to blow me off. He said, and I quoted him at the time, "Your reporters can do what they want, but I have to go to a radio show." And he walked off the field. Nevertheless, a few hours later, he lifted the ban, and our reporters were allowed to cover practice again. And he never explained why. Maybe he realized that the eyes of the nation were on him. I have no idea. But we won. And we were all better for it. I'm glad I went, and I'm glad that Zeleny sent me. And if any of you follow politics, you will know that Zeleny is today the chief national affairs correspondent for CNN, where he's confronting a lot more powerful people than football coach Tom Osborne. Although he did get a second shot at Osborne when Osborne, because he's Tom Osborne, got elected to Congress and served some time there as a Nebraska rep. So that day ended well, but I have to admit my first reaction when Zeleny asked me was extreme discomfort. I was really uncomfortable going into an environment that was totally foreign to me to challenge someone who was essentially God. But being uncomfortable was what made it worthwhile, and it's frankly what drove me to do it. I have been uncomfortable a lot in this business. I was a 20-year-old newspaper intern in New Orleans when I got called to cover my first fatal car accident. And I simply walked right in there with the firefighters until the New Orleans Police Public Information Officer signaled me over and literally started screaming at me in front of a press scrum because he said that I had contaminated his crime scene. I remember the first time I walked through the doors of a federal courthouse in Houston to cover a major civil trial. I remember knocking on doors in East Baltimore to cover a crime spree. I still have one of the empty tear gas canisters from when I helped cover the World Trade Organization protests in Seattle, when our editors basically handed us gas masks and dropped us off downtown and said, "Go find what's going on." And then there were all those times when someone told me, "No, you can't have that record," or the countless pushback from agencies telling me, "That's a lot of numbers. I'm not sure you'll be able to figure that out, young lady." There is a saying about journalism, and it goes sort of like this. The role of the newspaper is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. But maybe it should start with your own discomfort. Being uncomfortable isn't just about putting yourself into physical places and times. It is about stepping into new worlds and new bases of knowledge. It's about going into those worlds and admitting what you don't know. And that's really uncomfortable. I spent in college a semester in Ireland, and I did freelance work for a publication called the Sunday Business Post. And one day, one of the editors asked me to write a lengthy profile on Republican presidential candidate Pat Buchanan. The thinking was, you're the American here, so you're in the best position to do this. And I was really hoping that it would be, hey, Pearl Jam is in town, they're from the States, you're the American, like maybe you should go cover them or interview them. That was not the case. Pat Buchanan. Now, as much as I followed politics, this was not in my wheelhouse, and I admitted that to the editor. And I remember he said, in a mix of incredulity and matter-of-factness, instructing me to find out and write what I learned. And I appreciated the faith that he had in me, but more so than that, I appreciated the fact that he essentially just shoved me off the diving board. So I did the research, the reading, and the work, and I made it happen. And by God, they liked it. They ran it, like the newspaper at the time was this massive, like, broadleaf paper and really bright colors for the photos. And I remember they just ran this huge thing that I had written in this newspaper in this major global city. And as I'm walking around Dublin, seeing it on these newsstands, I was like, oh my God, like this was really pretty cool. I did this. And that was, you know, I was still in college. So that was a big feat. And going to college, I knew that I wanted to major in journalism. But what sealed it for me at the time was that journalism, at least at Nebraska, was one of the few majors that did not require any math. And I did not want to do math, having come off a final semester in high school with the cheerleading coach as my trigonometry teacher. But I had a classmate who was getting into data journalism, which at the time we called computer-assisted reporting, which sounds so archaic now. And I saw how awesome it was what he was doing. And I thought, no longer did you have to rely on the anecdotes and the he said, she said of a story. You could actually go to the numbers and simply get an answer. Yes, no, and if you're lucky, maybe even why. Using data in your stories made them bulletproof. So it wasn't until after college I dove into all those numbers, attending workshops, living on the data journalism listserv, and banging my head against the wall when I would write the same script over and over again, and it would make the same error, which I still do. But I'm glad I did it because it became a cornerstone of my career, and today I preach the value of using data, statistics, and numbers in your reporting. And getting out of that comfort zone for me with math really paid off. Because in 2007, I was at the Des Moines Register, part of a group of data journalists for Gannett, and I was delving into stories on biofuels and organic food fraud, when I got a call from Dwayne Bray, the former editor at the former Metro editor at the Dallas Morning News, where Dwayne and I had both worked. And Dwayne was then working at ESPN, and he was putting together an investigative unit, and he wanted someone with data journalism skills. I had never worked in sports, and I had never worked as a TV reporter. And here is Dwayne asking me, do you want to come to ESPN and be a sports television reporter? And I knew that beyond this door of opportunity was a path that would take me away from newspapers forever, but I had a chance to do investigative and data journalism on a national, even global scale with incredible resources. So despite the unfamiliarity with sports and television, I said, absolutely, I'll do it, and I've never regretted it. My colleagues and I have done some tremendous work, and I'd like to think that we've rocked the boat enough to make at least some difference. We've exposed leaders at major universities either hiding or lying about sexual assaults. We've uncovered athletes running fraudulent charities. We found high-stakes gambling on grade school kids playing football. We've held law enforcement agencies to account for failures in investigations, including a murder of a college football player. We've used data to show that athletes are indeed more likely than non-athlete students to be the respondent in a sexual assault complaint. We've rooted out wrongdoing in government, universities, companies, and the professional leagues. In some cases, our stories led to people being sued, fired, or all three. We have, as the saying goes, afflicted the comfortable. And afflicting the comfortable means to hold people and institutions in power to account. It is to be a watchdog. Now let's talk about the other part of the saying, comfort the afflicted, because that one can get distorted. I feel that saying that you should give a voice to people who don't have it on their own or who feel powerless. You should investigate the claims of whistleblowers, victims, people who might be oppressed. But even as you do this, remember, you are still beholden to the full set of facts. Comfort the afflicted does not mean you're to be an advocate. And sometimes you still have to ask the tough questions of the people who come forward to speak out against those who have wronged them. It essentially means you have to vet the victims. And that, too, can be uncomfortable, maybe even more so than confronting the alleged wrongdoers. There may be no more sensitive a victim than someone who has reported that she's been raped. And I've listened to many of them. And I've had those hard conversations because they needed to be had to substantiate the story. I've had to confront a survivor about inconsistencies in what she told me and what was in a Title IX report. And I told her that we had to have that conversation now and be forthcoming about it, instead of putting it out in a story without explanation and giving people the ability to poke holes in it and essentially invalidate everything she said. And I want to make clear here that it is not uncommon for there to be inconsistencies in what a victim reports. It does not mean that she's lying, but it was something we needed to address. When my colleague Mark Schleybaugh and I were writing our book Violated about the sexual assault scandal at Baylor, we had one survivor who asked us not to use certain details from her police report because they were embarrassing to her. One of them we did agree to withhold because it really didn't have a lot of bearing on the case, and it was a very physical description of part of her rape. But on the other one, I told her we have to put it in the book, even if it was embarrassing to her, for a couple reasons. It was part of the alleged perpetrator's defense, and it was a salient and important issue to address, and it was this. It was that she had consensual sex with him a day or so after the incident that she reported as a rape. It was an uncomfortable thing to tell her, but it was the right thing to do. Because what she did is something that other rape victims do, and to understand why she did it is important to understand the complexity of these cases. I know sometimes the mere act of my calling a woman who has reported being raped can be difficult for her, even traumatic. And I recognize that, but I still have to do this work. And I think it's a disservice if you make the assumption that the person isn't going to want to hear from you, because it has surprised me over the years how many times I will finish that conversation and the woman or man, I don't want to leave that out, would say, "I am so glad you called. I never thought anyone would care." And you know who else I call? I call the rapists or the people who have been accused. And I include some of their story and some of the facts I get from them. And I know some people take issue with that, saying that it's promoting a false narrative or piling on to victim blaming. But I know it deserves to be in the story, because in order for anyone to believe in anything I've written, I need to show them that they are getting the full picture. And I also believe that hearing that perspective has value, because if you don't know how someone gets to that point or what influences him or her to do something like that, you have no idea how to address that behavior or that circumstance moving forward, and you need to. And that holds true for sexual assault stories, just as it does in any case where you have one party or group of people who are speaking out against a perpetrator or power. There is a strong sentiment in journalism right now pushing people away from the idea of objectivity. assuming that objectivity simply means giving both sides of an issue, regardless of how unsubstantiated one of those sides may be. That true objectivity is impossible because we all have bias based on our own life experience and environment, and that even the choice of stories to report on is influenced by that bias. But here's what you do to address that. You take an issue, you report on all the voices that are speaking out on it, what they say, who they are, what their motivations might be, and you fill that out with facts from other sources, documents, data, public records requests, from your own observations. The goal isn't to tell a balanced story in the sense of sides, it's to tell a complete story. And there is another saying about journalism, which is this: if someone says it's raining and another person says it's dry, it's not your job to quote them both. Your job is to open the window and look. It is tempting in this line of work to get drawn in by the outrage in stories you report on and feel that you need to do more. But remember that your role and the reason your words will be trusted. If you're going to have a functioning democracy, you have to have a place you can go where you can trust that someone is reflecting the society for what it is, not for what we want it to be. Someone has to play that role. That's what journalism is. I am not an advocate, and I cannot be. The best thing you can do is report and uncover what is wrong. There are plenty of other people who can take the ball from there, but you can't be one of them. You can't be donating to campaigns, putting up yard signs, splashing your political views all over social media. You have to tell your friends no sometimes. And that can be the most uncomfortable of all. And again, that's okay. Regardless their intentions, people will always try to sway you. When powerful people, agencies, leaders, and anyone with an impressive sounding title says no, it's easy to accept that. It's sometimes uncomfortable to challenge authority, but do. Because powerful people, agencies, leaders, and people with impressive sounding titles can often be wrong, either mistaken or just outright lying. And they can try to keep you from the truth. I've had student journalists or those just starting out ask me what to do when some sports information director says media may not contact athletes directly. Now, the SID might try to sell this to you as a protective act to make sure its athletes aren't distracted or subject to public pressure. But what about the athletes who believe they are being harmed by the institution, who want to speak out but who are being controlled? What about the young male athlete who during COVID told me he couldn't talk about his concerns for medical treatment at his college because the SID told him he couldn't? Or all the female athletes at many institutions who were told to only report their assaults to a coach or someone in the athletic department so as to keep it in-house. They need you. They need you to get around the gatekeepers. They deserve to have their voices heard and for people to be held accountable. So when that request comes from the SID or the PIO or the PR person and it's a barrier, say no. You do not work for them. You do not work for the school, the company. They do not tell you what to do. Your editors, producers, directors, they tell you what to do. But even then, you do not work for them or for any media outlet as much as you work as a journalist. You work as the eyes and ears of the public. You work as someone with the sacred trust of viewers, readers, listeners who expect you to observe, inquire, and investigate what they cannot. You work as someone responsible for conveying the truth and relaying what has been hidden, ignored, or undiscovered. Sometimes that's ugly, sometimes that's not popular, sometimes the truth is something people wish wasn't true, but you still have an obligation to be true, and that can put you in a very uncomfortable situation. I have been in that uncomfortable situation many times. And I have drawn the ire of large groups of people who were not happy to read what we were reporting, even though it was all entirely true. I've had people say they wish I would be sued, fired, even raped. I've had my face superimposed on many unflattering images, and there have been many derogatory comments about my appearance. My work has been subject to endless deflection and conflation. I had one university interim president even publicly state that we should offer an apology to an athlete whose alleged sexual assault we reported on. That athlete would plead guilty to misdemeanor assault but would remain on the team. A couple years later, university investigators would find him responsible for having sexually assaulted a different woman in a separate incident. The interim president never addressed the whole apology issue after that. A loud crowd of people didn't want to hear that, and they made their displeasure known. So it comes down to this. You can either bask in the adoration of the sycophants, or you can earn the respect of people who value integrity and who are empowered by information, even if it's information that might expose a wrongdoing tied to or about something they value or love. The trolls and gatekeepers can make your life pretty uncomfortable, but only if you let them. You can waste your time trying to reason with them, or you can do as I do, which is simply envision them sitting in their mother's basement, watching porn, posting on fan sites, and eating a Hot Pocket. That's my happy place. But really, none of that abuse is okay. None of it's okay, not at all. Not the trolls, not the power mongers who deny the facts, but I know what's true, and I know what matters, and I know who matters. In the summer of 2020, through a series of requests and constant pestering of prosecuting attorneys, my colleague Tom Janot and I got records more than 40 years old in a rape case in Pennsylvania. They were hard copy, either handwritten or typed on a typewriter. Some of you might not know what a typewriter is. And they had the names of several women who had reported being raped or attacked. One of the women was Elizabeth Betsy Saylor. I knew that she'd be in her early 60s by then. I figured maybe married under a different name, maybe dead, for all I knew. But I searched for days. I left a lot of really confusing voicemail messages on people who weren't Betsy Saylor's machines or phones, until I called a number in New Hampshire. I said I was looking for the Elizabeth Saylor who went to Penn State in the 1970s. She confirmed that was her. And then I said, to make absolutely sure, I'm looking for the Elizabeth Saylor who made a police report regarding a crime. And at that point, I would know if I had the right Elizabeth Saylor. And it's at that point when I make these calls that I kind of hold my breath. I didn't know if she was going to hang up the phone. I didn't know what she was going to do. Yell at me? No idea. There I sat, fingers ready to type, when Betsy calmly and concisely said she was indeed the right Betsy Saylor, and for the next 90 minutes took me through step by step about her assault by former Penn State football player Todd Hodney. I had read her grand jury testimony from 1978, and it was almost word for word what she was telling me that day. While we talked, Betsy told me about another football player, a teammate of Todd Hodney's. His name was Irv Pankey. After Betsy's grand jury testimony that several of the football players, including Irv, had attended, he came to her dorm room and knocked on her door. He extended his hand, he introduced himself and said, "I believe you. I believe every word you said," and told her that she would never have to walk alone anywhere on that campus. In talking to Betsy, I knew right at that moment that that interaction was a thing unto itself. About a year later, Irv would again knock on Betsy's door at a studio setup that we created in State College, Pennsylvania, and the two would be reunited after 40 years. Very long story short, our story, called Untold, ended up giving Betsy and several other women a chance to finally tell their stories and hold a team, a coach, an institution, a community to account. And we made a film separately about Betsy and Irv, and Irv's incredible gesture. And this is a bit of a spoiler alert, but Betsy and Irv, who were both widowed, are today a couple very much in love. So when I say I know who matters, it's Betsy who matters. And what this reporting meant for her and for all the other women whose lives have been cast aside. It matters to any survivor who sees herself or himself relegated to the same void in history, knowing that their story has value and that it matters, and that there is an impact in sharing the facts and their experiences. And this all really got going after finding just the right document. So this work is not easy because there are so many forces not wanting the information to get out. And that's everything from an agency denying a public records request to someone threatening your life. And here I must mention that, as has been talked about before on other panels, we are reminded today with the news that just yesterday, a reporter was fatally shot and a photographer injured while on assignment in Orlando. And there are definite risks to doing this. You need to know to trust and to be skeptical. And if something doesn't seem right or seems incomplete, you have to confront it and give people as much information as you can, clearly and concisely, so they can make sound decisions and form educated opinions and keep our democratic society afloat. There is something about this industry that has stuck with me ever since I was in high school. It was in my first journalism class as a sophomore, and we had these textbooks. And in one of the first chapters, there was a line that said, "You don't need a license to be a journalist." And that stuck with me. Like, think about that. You need a license for a lot of things. You need a license to be a doctor, an engineer, an attorney, a massage therapist, even to sell real estate. But you do not need a license to be a part of the fourth estate. And as such, the industry follows certain ethics and standards, and on its own has to engender public trust. And yes, we are in an era where we are bombarded with information and people struggling to distinguish among a hot take, a social media blitz, a PR campaign, talking heads, disinformation, and actual news. But journalism means you follow these standards. And as you investigate and report and you share facts and you're complete and you give context, your name will come to mean something. And you will become a trusted source. And when you succeed with this, what you publish has power. And always remember that. I have an editor at ESPN, a guy with whom I've worked for more than 20 years, and he reminded me the other day of something a former colleague of ours once said about landing a big investigative story. And this was in the time when your story didn't actually come out until it landed in the driveway in a big fat Sunday edition. But he said you should never sleep well the night you file a major story. You should be sweating it until it hits the driveway. You could take that a couple different ways, but what he meant was you should be nervous, anxious, excited, because you know there's a lot at stake. Many times you are about to drop a bomb. Even if you believe all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed and it's accurate and everything's been checked, you should still appreciate the gravity of what you're about to do. And that, too, is uncomfortable. But that type of uncomfortable means you're doing something difficult, but something very, very right. We have a real desert now in journalism. Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism did a study on this, and it showed that 70 million residents, or a fifth of the country's population, either lives in an area with no local news organization or one at risk. With only one local news outlet and very limited access to critical news and information that can inform their everyday decisions and sustain grassroots democracy. About 7% of the nation's counties, or 211, now have no local newspaper. Do you want to know why there's an extra tax on every meal you buy at a restaurant? Are you upset that they closed down the free health clinic in your neighborhood? When you jog by that stream in the morning, are you wondering, like, why is there this yellow film on it? Do you want to know why your legislature refuses to make changes in state laws on gambling, marijuana, or abortion rights? You won't find any of this on a cable TV news shout match. We need people who know what they're doing in those city council meetings, at those legislative hearings, in the faces of those policymakers. We need people to demand the data from police departments. We need journalists to hold accountable the pillars of our society: politics, the judiciary, elected officials, medicine, finance, housing, law enforcement, entertainment, and sports. We need real investigating and exposing hard truths, even if that challenges established beliefs. We need journalists to feel empowered and entitled to the truth. And why? Because today's public needs reliable facts and information. Because without that, we risk allowing wrongdoing, corruption, and false narratives to jeopardize our security, safety, and our very democracy. We need more investigative journalists to accept that challenge. So if you are feeling uncomfortable because you might get people enraged, that you might upend a way of doing things, that you might knock down an idol, if you're asking yourself, should I have asked that question? Should I have knocked on that door? Should I have challenged that records denial? Should I be filming this right now? If you're asking yourself, do I have a right to? Should I be here? Should I walk through this door? You already know the answer. Hell yes. That is all I have. Onward. Somebody's already getting directions to get out of here.
Okay, I think, working, okay. So you obviously are investigating things and doing things that are going to put you in positions of, as you said, hated, not liked, so on and so forth. What have you done to like protect yourself in situations, and how do you go about this in a way that prioritizes your like safety?
In terms of protecting myself in a very real sense of someone physically coming after me?
Not even that, like yes to an extent, but also like your name and your reputation.
Well, I protect myself by continuing my reporting. I mean, in the example I gave about the president who was calling for the apology and the trolls and everything after that, I mean, my response to that was just to continue reporting on that story, continue unearthing issues at the university, and just keep putting out facts and proving that, like backing up everything that we had initially reported. And I mean, that's the best thing you can do. I mean, I rarely ever respond anymore to anyone on social media or even an email who has some inflammatory thing to say. I'll answer people's questions, you know, if they have a legitimate question, but I'm not going to engage in any sort of back and forth with people who, as I told you, I sort of, you know, envision them doing their thing, and they can have their opinion, but I will continue reporting, and that will back up everything that we've done and that we stand by.
I like that. That's nice.
Well, good.
That makes me feel good.
Anyone else?
Paula, explain to people who are math impaired and sick, I didn't think there was going to be any math, about how you two can actually do this. As somebody who got into this, dragged by their nose by one of your colleagues who was involved in what used to be called computer-assisted reporting.
Yes. So it's a different way of thinking about math, not so much as the torturous trigonometry class, but actually more about thinking of as how you can find relationships, right? And like I was saying, it's a matter of taking something that's sort of an anecdote and using data to prove whether it's right or wrong. I will go back to the example we had of, for years, people were always sort of speculating on, well, you know, it seems like there's a lot of athletes who are, you know, getting in the news for sexual assault, but, you know, that's just happening because, you know, they're athletes and they're high profile. So we're like, okay, well, we can sit here and debate this and go back and forth, or we can get the numbers and find out. And that's what we did. And we found out and that they were indeed 3 times as likely as non-male athlete students to be accused of a sexual misconduct. And so what I advise, if you're interested in this, in fact, first of all, I encourage all of you to be interested in data journalism, because as we're in this era of people not trusting the news, data work, I think, is so important because you can show your math, right? And you can show people how you got to the findings that you got, because it's all right there. It's all right there in the numbers. And the numbers can reveal things that you may not have known. They can reveal relationships. They can point you to outliers, and outliers themselves might be a story, because outliers may be evidence of wrongdoing or cheating. And I encourage you, if you have the opportunity to take data journalism classes, take them. As students, you can be members of NICAR, the National Institute for Computer Assisted Reporting. There is so much information out there. There are boot camps that are in person, online, and virtual, that you can take to learn more data skills. Look at the story. In fact, one of the best things to do, which is what I did sort of starting out, was look at the stories that have been done with data journalism and really sort of get your own mind going with, wow, I could maybe do that in my newsroom or in my market. So have I preached the benefits of data work? All right.
Well, I would like to elaborate on the first question about when you're dealing with issues
I mean, I make it a practice, I mean, and regardless of the type of reporting you do, you should do this, to lock down all of your social media accounts, even though some platforms are making that a little more difficult, with as much sign-in security as you can so someone doesn't hack your account. And it's funny, I had a colleague of mine recently who came to me and said, I'm getting all these, this is someone else who was reporting on a different college athletic program, saying, oh, I'm getting all these, threats and everything, can you help me go to these, those websites that say, hey, you can background anyone for whatever, and she's like, can I get my information scraped from there? And I said, yeah, I said, but that's not your problem. Your problem is that you're putting too much of this crap out on Twitter already, yourself, voluntarily. So as a journalist, monitor your own social media audience. I mean, stuff that is out there that's truly public, don't talk about where you live. I mean, it's hard when you're a student, right? But I mean, try not to talk about exactly where you live, your family, where you're going. Don't give people an opportunity to, as much as people worry about these sort of data miners and these background check companies and whatnot, I think more often than not, the information that people who are harassing you beyond social media are getting is stuff that you are voluntarily putting out there. So, yeah.
Tell us, I'd love to know more about your transition into broadcasting, what that was like for you, what you found difficult, and the second part, how many of those skills, how broad do the skills need to be for our young journalists?
Okay, I'll take that in 2 sections. It was hard, yeah, it was harder for making the transition to ESPN with the whole not having done sports, not having done broadcast. It was a lot harder for me to get into the broadcast aspect of it because I had never written a script, I'd never tracked anything, I'd never done anything on camera. It was kind of an odd place to learn that on the fly. But I credit all of my amazing colleagues, including TJ Quinn here, for helping me out with that. And but yeah, I mean, it was really on-the-job training, which I don't know if I recommend that exactly, but yeah, fortunately I had people who helped me with that. And then sort of to your second question, one of the things when I talked to college students that I mentioned, I mean, beyond the data, so 2 things I always mention. One is the data journalism thing, right? And the second thing is that as you go into this industry, do not think of it as I'm going to go into one particular medium, because anymore you need to be able to do all of this, right? You should come out knowing how to write a short story, write a long, feature story, do something on camera, do a podcast, know how to put together a social media campaign for your story, all of these things, right? I mean, I mentioned the piece that we did on Todd Hodney and the Penn State rapes. And when that story came out, I mean, we had this ridiculously long online story. We had the film, the Betsy and her film. Tom and I did a podcast episode on it. There was a TikTok video. We did not do it, thankfully. Somebody else did. And then there was an Instagram story. And, so you need to know how to do all of these things. So as you're thinking, oh, I just want to do, I just want to be on TV, or I just want to write, or I just want to do podcasts, that's not the way the industry is anymore. So keep in mind that when you're here and you have the opportunity to do it, take advantage of all the possible training for all the possible media that you can get your hands on. Anyone else?
Thank you, Paul. That was terrific. Is Sarah here, or Sarah's? So we have a little tradition with all our keynote speakers, we adopt you. You become a Hoosier, and you've been complaining all day it's cold, so we're hoping some of this helps you. So we have a lot of our Indiana. So I know she said she was from Nebraska, but we have a better color of red here, so we're a cream and crimson, and so you have a lot of our swag. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
All right, so what we're going to do now, and I really appreciate it, one of the things that Paula talked about was the converting from print to broadcast. I also was a convert from print to broadcast, and so is Professor Jerry Lenoska, who's here. And none of us could have done it without our colleagues, and I think that's one of the things that's great about our business. Everybody, it's a fraternity. Once you're in it, you're always in it. And that's also why we've all asked you to keep Dylan Lyons, only 24, and his photographer and the 2 other victims in your thoughts and prayers today, because attack against one journalist is an attack against all of us. And what happened yesterday is just, sickening. But on a lighter note, we're going to try to turn this one more time. I want to thank all the speakers for coming. You talk about a fraternity. I called some of them late. Hello, Paula, and said, could you do this for us this year? And every one of them said yes, and they're here. Whether, Paula got stuck in Omaha, had to fly to D.C. to get here yesterday. Sarah Seidner landed in Indy, and CNN said, we need you in Ohio. So she flew early this morning to get here. And all of our other speakers, I really appreciate all of you coming today. And I want to thank one more time our sponsors, Scripps Howard Foundation, Lumina Foundation, the Indiana Citizen, SBJ Indianapolis, Gray TV, Hoosier State Press Association Foundation, Indiana Broadcasters Association, Hutton Honors College, and the Indiana Local News Initiative, and all our partners. You can see them all on your program. We're going to have, we think it's important that the reason we have this symposium is to make investigative journalism accessible to everyone. And so we also want our journalists to be accessible. So we're going to convene to the Commons area right here, and I think there's some refreshments and cookies or something like that. But you also have a chance to meet our board members. All of them are, have been working journalists at some point. Meet our board members and meet our speakers. And we also have Paula, I told you, is an author, so we also have her book out there. If you'd like to buy her book, I'm sure she would sign it for you. And thank you again. We appreciate everybody coming today. Thank you.